Hello, 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 and welcome to day 8 of the 79th edition of the Cannes Film Festival. We are doing episode number 3 here. I'm Eliana.
And I'm Patrick. Hi.
Hi, Patrick. How is everything going?
Going all right. We are in a weird kind of space here. We're enclosed by dark windows here in the Cineum. The Cineum is this theater that is sort of not... It doesn't feel like it's part of the festival. It's the one where you take a bus to even get to, and then sometimes when the bus doesn't come, it causes a lot of pain and stress
Yes.
on you. But on the other hand, once you've arrived here, even though it clearly doesn't feel like a festival, you at least have the really nice screens, you have comfortable seats, and in that sense, I often wait for the most anticipated films to see them here, ideally on the IMAX screen, which they
Yes.
only have here.
Yes, indeed. I mean, even though you said we take a bus here, it does feel as if we can be on an island here. There's most of the films that will be shown in competition and sometimes in Un Certain Regard will definitely make its way through the schedule at the Cineum. And for some people, it's easier to get these tickets, especially if they're earlier in the morning.
And especially those people who are not press accredited, because
Yes.
most of them pilgrimage here, actually.
Yes. And so today we are here. Last week, oh my God.
Last time, yeah.
Last time we left you on a little cliffhanger, and what we wanted to talk about was the film Virages. I don't know if we'll just get right into it since we have a bit of limited time, even though a lot has been happening in the festival. You've seen a lot of competition films that we have not talked about, perhaps with reason, that have not quite left an impression upon you.
That's true. But, you know, by looking back at last year's competition, I realized I really only liked 4 films of the 22. So I think in that sense, maybe this year isn't as exceptional. I actually prefer maybe films from other sections as well. Yeah, Virage, in any case, that's a debut feature that played in Acid, right?
Yes.
Acid,
It
as they say.
is a long feature film by Aline Suter and Céline Carridroit, a double directed feature. And it's a film that we both quite liked.
It's so far still my number 1 film here, I would say.
I would have to agree with you on that. You know, when you read the synopsis of this film, it sounds, I think we read it earlier. I should have probably prepared it right here, but about a woman named Joanna. It says, who works at a watch factory. She goes on with her daily life in Geneva and has a little side interest in drag races. I think I read it to a friend of ours and he went, drag races, it's queer then. But they're really referring that are done with car races, the traditional drag race. But yes, the film is also queer.
Yeah, and you had a chance to interview the directors, right?
Yes, I had a chance to interview the directors. This film, in some sense, has documentary and autofictional aspects to it, focusing on the main character / the protagonist, Joanna, and how she just navigates through life almost with this open, childlike, one can say, even though childlike almost seems reductive, and I don't want to use a sort of reductive way of referring to her, but just a very open and simple way of just receiving and being received. She's transitioned into being a woman. It's very layered in a way. It's very difficult to talk about because when you see the film, the opening scene is actually just incredible. You see her driving a motorbike down a street, and then the motorbike sound starts to level up, shall we say, and it's clearly the sound of something with more horsepower. And then that transitions into grunge music, and we're already in this atmospheric feeling of what the movie is going to be. And I mean, in that opening scene alone, it says everything in some sense about the film. And the film is shot in 16 millimeter. And what else is there to say? There's
Her workplace, maybe?
Yeah, so she works at a watch factory.
Even though she doesn't like watches.
Even though she doesn't work. I think this is also in the synopsis.
And she likes to draw comics.
And yes, and she draws comics. I'm having one of these moments where it's difficult to talk about something that I very much liked in a way that's compact and concrete.
Perhaps it makes sense to contextualize this a bit in terms of what we see at other festivals or at Cannes as well. And to me, there seems to be a lineage to last year's Laurent dans le Vent, or even before the Guiraudie. I think they have a similar kind of humor that comes through. And these films also are sometimes in this interstitial place of, feature film and documentary. And they're keenly observed, are often very reduced to a bare minimum, even when it comes to performance and when it comes to humor. And it's actually through that I think many jokes land so well in this film. I also want to say that there's a notion of her drawing comics that becomes, or that opens up spaces where we can explore more about her, living as a trans woman, which does not feature in the film at all. The film even suggests that perhaps her colleagues at work don't know.
Yes.
So that's very lovely. And in these comics, however, there's some violence that erupts, but it erupts in a way that, it takes us out of the movie and we just read these comic strips that are just shown to us. And then the film just continues as if nothing had happened. So we get this background into her, and these comics are actually drawn by her. So a lot of the work that you would in other films have to do through dialogue or something like that, or if you're a very good filmmaker, through meticulous, crafting of scenes. Here it's in a very economic fashion, I would say. It's part of it, but it also doesn't determine the character.
Yes. The filmmakers, when I got the chance to meet with them, they told me that they had met Joanna 10 years prior, actually, and they began speaking with her. And the way that she spoke about her life and the stories that she told, they just had this rhythm and layered comedic aspect to it, as well as being so very rich in detail and storytelling. And they had proposed at the time that they wanted to make a film with her. But since she was unemployed then, she refused. Fast forward around 4 or 5 years, she actually ran into one of the filmmakers and then said, I have a job now. I'll be willing to make the film. And the filmmakers were quite proud to share that story with them because they liked the idea that they were approached by her. And she has all these hobbies. And you see that in the way that she rediscovers, shall we say, this old Volkswagen Beetle that was in her garage. And the way that the discovery comes about too is, they told me that when the filmmakers realized that she had this Volkswagen too, since Joanna was just telling her what she had planned to do for the summer, that she had this old Volkswagen in the garage that hadn't been touched for a while. And when they saw it, they were also equally surprised, as I think I felt as an audience member when it was suddenly revealed to us that, she's going to start working on her car and improving it. And in some sense, the film doesn't linger at all on pain or trauma. It's the English title of Virages, and Virage can be translated as turns or drifts. The English title is Summer Drift.
Yeah, which also links to Laurent dans le Vent from last year, which had...
Drifting Laurent, I believe was the title, right? And there's this meandering way in which you can maybe say simply it's a story about empowerment and finding a new sense of life and rhythm that is one's own in how Joanna goes forward. But there are so many other things that I think are important to note. I wanted to ask the filmmaker specifically about political messages, because this film is very much about visibility being political. You have certain moments where things are just in the frame that clearly could be making a statement. The car is, in a sense, a metaphor also for the transformation of Joanna's own body and what must be done to some degree for the internal and the external to run.
Yeah, and on a visual level, we see that also, where we see, I think it might be in one of her dreams, I'm not entirely sure, but we see these body parts, these limbs next to old car parts, basically. They're just next to each other.
That So Joanna eventually decides to fix up her old car and join a drag race competition in Belgium.
Through Facebook groups.
And what I heard was that people recognize Joanna through her car because her car was linked to her previous life, and that body of the car was recognizable. And then transforming the body of Joanna, transforming the body of the car, which we only see in the film itself. We don't see the first thing I mentioned. And then still having that level of recognition / lien to connect the two together is something that is, from a material perspective, very fascinating to me.
We covered much ground here. We already mentioned the humor, and I want to emphasize that we talked so much about transformation here, but all the transformation you see is super, super subtle. So you have to really pick up on certain details in shots or something to really follow these kind of through lines. But also the thing we mentioned is the humor, and I even like there are often these very deadpan comments of her, and there's a scene when we are in an open air cinema and they show Mad Max,
Yes.
and you can see how she's sort of, she's sort of interested, or at least not too concerned with the notion of the end of the world. And we see Mad Max playing there, but also if in certain scenes when we are in the comic book store, we see a little book there on display that reads La fin du monde. So there are all these details that really tie in together, and it's really, I think, such a pleasure to just discover all these things. And all the while the film seems very generous and seems very open, and those are the kind of films that I relish the most.
Same with me. There are other details that I don't think we'll have time to discuss right now, but if you're able to see it, we definitely encourage you to do so.
Cool. And I think that leads us to our next film.
Yes.
Should we maybe go with the competition title?
Yeah.
Which is Christian Mungiu's Fjord. Christian Mungiu is one of two directors here who has already won a Palme d'Or. The other is Gradiva. Yeah, Mungiu, of course, that was quite an intense film back then, and still is, I would say. 4 months, 3 weeks, and 2 days. The film about an abortion in Romania. Now we are not in Romania anymore, which is the place where still his last film took place, RMN, which I quite liked. I think it won me over time. I think at the first showing back then, I wasn't quite, I didn't know how I responded to it fully, but I think part of that is because his style, Mungiu's style, is so reduced in a way. It is not really pointing at itself the entire time. It's rather something very, I think there's some sophistication to it, but it's very subdued. It's very methodical, I would say. It's very clearly outlined. And this time around, I've come to appreciate that much more directly, I would say. Do you want to introduce us to this film, the general premise?
Yes.
Because it is interesting that now Mungiu for the first time has international stars as well.
This film is being marketed as Mungiu's first English language feature, whereas after having seen the film, I've recognized there are 3 languages primarily, English, Norwegian, and Romanian, that are spoken in it, starring Renate Reinsve as the mother, Sebastian Stan as the father, and they play a couple, a Romanian-Norwegian couple. Sebastian Stan is the Romanian father, who have 5 kids. They're evangelists, and they have moved to Norway, where the kids and Stan's character have obtained Norwegian citizenship. One believes, it's not so clear to me whether the children also have it at the moment, but they've picked up, gone to Norway. They're trying to start a new life there.
To a remote hamlet.
Yes. Yeah. In a village that seems like they mainly fish and farm.
Yeah, I mean the title,
Yeah,
right?
Fjord. But
yeah, and this is also part of the first images, right? We see the water.
Yes, we see the water, and then we see one of these gorgeous fjords that just is like a slanted, towering top hat.
Right. And perhaps the one thing I want to add before we go on is that to me, it almost felt, seeing this together with RMN, it almost felt like a diptych because in RMN, we are in this Romanian community, also in a village, but it's sort of also this in-between place we have, because there is this Hungarian community. There are also German ancestors in that region. This place has undergone a lot of shifts over time. And by that time, I think the Hungarians were already sort of, acknowledged and respected. It took a very long time for that to happen. But now new people come into that place, and that is immigrants from, I think, maybe an African country or something. I don't quite recall where they were from. But in any case, they are visibly different because they have a different skin color and so on. And resentment and xenophobia ensues. But basically, that's the film. And here we have something almost from the other end of the spectrum, but in its, in its form, in its perhaps procedures, not so different after all. It's in any case, I think, interesting to see these films together.
Yeah, you have it in this film more on the larger governmental and then subsidiary governmental department level type of discrimination, ultimately, that Mungiu is pointing out. So my understanding is that Romanians as immigrants also make up 4,000 to 10,000 people out of a population in Norway of around 6 million, while in Romania there are about 19 million people. I don't know how many are abroad. I'm sorry to throw statistics out like this, but I was just curious for me to look at, because I ran into a Polish friend who told me this resonated with him because this is a Polish story too, because apparently, I didn't know this, that there are over 100,000 Polish immigrants in Norway as well, and they represent one of the larger bodies of immigrants in Norway. And essentially what happens over the course of the film is the Romanian family is accused of potentially abusing their children. One, during a gym class or during school, some of the teachers observe that one of the girls has some bruises and marks on her body. We have seen this somewhat before, this type of curious mark or touching of a younger child, and this is obviously taboo. I mean, we see it in the Ceylan to some degree, but obviously Mungiu is going in a completely different direction. And then this leads to an investigation in which the parents are immediately separated from their children, and they are put under watch and surveillance because they believe perhaps that the religious home in which the Bible is taught, and which they soon come to know that Sebastian Stan's and Renata Reinsva's characters have a type of punishment system that is implemented against the children if they don't do as they're told. Primarily not praying, not doing their work, or even engaging in activities that seem more
benign,
benign, like listening to music or playing YouTube or wanting to play games. And what ensues is a whole entire process that Mungiu films as kind of maybe purely observational to a degree. I mean, you have both extremes represented, and please take it away.
Well, I don't know if I can take it away, just due to the fact that I think it's a very difficult film to position yourself towards, because we have the central family, but there's so little we know about this family, I think. And so all these details about, you just mentioned this point system when the children lose what is in this family established as points when they don't pray and these kind of things. And when they receive little slaps, perhaps, we learn most of it just through later investigations, and it's something that the film doesn't confront us with from the start. However, we do from the start have this uncomfortable feeling, because the way the film opens, right? We have the two eldest children who hug the Renate Reinsve character lovingly, but then once they approach the father, it's a bit less
Yeah.
so. It feels a bit forced almost. So there are early hints that something is not quite right. On the other hand, we see how the child protection, how this entire investigation, people behave in a manner that doesn't feel like it's legitimate,
Yeah, they
because there are these scenes when they say, "Oh no, this is not possible," but
Yeah.
then the central family insists, and then it turns out no, it is possible. So they often claim that things are just normal, that's just the procedure, how it goes. And then you learn, oh no, there is already a bias against this family. And this bias also is expressed through, just the fact that this family is persecuted in a way that other families in that community were not in the past for similar kind of accusations. So you can see there is something going on from the allegedly purportedly progressive side of the Norwegian state apparatus. And the film is so complicated to navigate because we have to negotiate between what the state does to our best interest and what freedom do we still have as to how we raise our children, for instance.
Yeah. I mean, it was very clear that the social workers were all too eager to just sort of separate the children from their parents. And I think that that is definitely an issue. And it seems also with little justification, like this whole entire idea of the bruise that comes up too, which could have been, I mean, we see multiple scenes where the children they're even in gym class and they're clearly wrestling and they're throwing each other on the ground. And it's just this little justification that it takes the social workers to just uplift the children. And this is obviously, which is very quickly noted. I mean, it's not just that families who are immigrant families fall victim to this more easily, but I mean, it is kind of that simply. In response to that, the Romanian family are very quick to then call it religious persecution. Now, I also this is so difficult because you can see the extreme right, gobbling that up as an example of, this is an intolerant Western country. I'm not trying to defend Norway at all, but it's also such a mismatch. For me, the thing that I think is also very interesting is the fact that the children cannot advocate for themselves. And to be so vulnerable, of course, that is ultimately the biggest stake in such a consideration. But I feel as if the film didn't really explore the stakes as much as I wish that they did, even though it explored everything around, everything on how it's being manipulated, everything on how the scenes that had happened in the first part were then brought back in the second, in the court trial, where we saw the person with whom, so Sebastian Stan's character gets employed somewhere. And it just seems like a nice welcoming day. But really, this person, and of course, naturally they would be, is called to testify and to state how did he seem as a father? Because the children are ultimately being pried away from the parents because they're deemed unfit to raise their children. And the children are immediately placed into foster homes. And in one scene, the foster mother is called for testimony. And she says, oh, the children weren't allowed to have music, weren't allowed to dance, weren't allowed to go on YouTube. And this, to me, like, if you prevent your children from doing that, that does not make you unfit as a parent at the core of what it means to be a parent. And I found that was just so, the reasonings, but I understand.
That was the strength of the film, no? That it mixed these things together.
Yes.
And it makes it so frustrating, no?
Yes, it really infuriated me, as you can tell in the tone of my voice, which I should calm down a bit. But no, ultimately the film gives a lot to think about. It's based in some sense on a real case, perhaps loosely. There was an event where a Romanian family in 2015 was separated for 4 years from their children. I believe they also had 5 children. Some things that I read said that it was more specific, that it had nothing to do with any evidence of physical violence or child abuse, but rather it was a concern that the so-called culture and upbringing that they were being raised in, the religious one so dedicated to the Bible, would retard their growth into the modern age, into just what it means to be educated in our contemporary time. And then this is very interesting to me, because as an argument, how can we say, we've now reached a point where the idea of religious freedom is inferior to that of some form of larger social freedom that we believe should exist. Like there's an example in the film where I think one of the social workers or one of the teachers is alerted simply because one of the children says, "Oh, you're not allowed to be a lesbian in the Bible. That's a sin." And then this scares one of the teachers and thinks, no, we cannot have this type of a child in our classroom saying that. And the fact that there's this drive to shut that down is also frightening, in my opinion. Of course, I'm not going to defend it. I don't believe in it. But it's curious to see that religious expression is also a threat to liberal expression.
Yeah, it's like what they call in France laïcité, right? The separation of church and state. And what we see here is almost an expression of paranoia that that fuses society here, because we have, as a sort of leitmotif of the film, we have the tunes of Amazing Grace.
Yes.
That's how the film starts, and later we see that the father, the Sebastian Stan character, is playing these tunes. But however, once he plays them in the cafeteria, is it at his workplace or is it at the school?
I think he plays it at the school once.
In their cafeteria?
In the cafeteria.
Yeah, okay. He's told to
play something more joyful.
Play something more joyful.
And there's a whole subplot with a neighbor, which is also quite interesting, but I'll let that stay for you, the audience, to see. But when the daughter starts to play on the piano and she's told off by the neighbor, who also happens to be maybe the headmaster of the school, and is told, sorry, we're not allowed to hum that tune. We're not allowed to evangelize here. And the daughter says, but I wasn't singing the lyrics. And then he says, it doesn't matter. Like, you know the rules. And it's just laïcité is sanitization. I mean, if people say otherwise, it's not that. I understand that it's more complex than that overall, but still it's a move towards a sanitization that's equally threatening and scary, that I think people often don't see.
Yeah, it becomes somewhat totalitarian, but in a very kind.
Yeah, it pretends to be generous. Yeah. It pretends to be like, oh, we are all now equal. We are all now people who don't engage in overt worship of religion as to not insult another person's personal views.
Right, and part of that is then also that there's this condescension toward the Sebastian Stan character, because they again and again make allusions to the fact that he's not Norwegian, even though he is.
Yes.
It's just not that he grew up in that society and isn't fluent in that language. Yeah, I think this film is really thought-provoking overall, and I think I'm just impressed how effortless his direction is as well. There's this scene, like just the way he develops dialogue, I think feels very natural. I mean, I don't speak Norwegian, and there's also a little bit of Romanian in there, but there's also a significant part of English. And I think sometimes I had a bit of a hard time to believe that they all spoke English so well, like even the children and so on. But then again, the way it plays out in the film, it didn't really bother me too much. I was just a bit doubtful at times.
Yeah. Piggying back off of that, unless you have something else to say, I think sometimes that the film did feel like, oh, this is appealing to me, an English-speaking audience. There were like certain moments, like when he said, oh, now you tried, now it's my turn, and then slaps the axe into the thing. I mean, it's a comedic moment, but it also felt like, no, now we're just playing to the audience.
Yeah.
And I think that it would have been equally effective to have just cut to the scene of her trying to pump her breast milk and not be able to get any milk out. Sorry, that was a specific.
That's a very good director's note, I guess. Yeah, I mean, for a film by Mungiu, you really don't have these, great scenes that play for the audience. So I think moments like this are very rare for cinema. And I still have to compliment him for the fact that he had really, for the first time, really these international stars. And it still feels totally like a Mungiu film. It doesn't feel like he has now developed scenes just for them, I think, maybe except for this axe moment. But I mean, that is like 10 seconds. So, I did.
Yes.
So, yeah. Overall, I really liked it. I feel like I may have liked it a bit more than you.
I think it has definitely riled me up. And for that, honestly, if we're thinking about Palme d'Ors again, I would probably also say it is deserved.
I mean, the ones, it's not a strong year so far, really. We were let down by a lot of films already. And I think you might be able to catch up with one or two that you haven't seen yet.
I'm hoping, yes.
Yeah, and I think we might still have a little time to bring it to a close with one of the discoveries of the festival, I think.
Yes.
Which is Marine Atlan's La Gradiva, is also a debut. The director, Atlan, she worked as a DP before, for instance, for the film
Les Reines du Drame by Alexis Longois.
Right. Also, The Rupture by Iris Kaltenberg. So and I think you get a sense for that, right? It's very well shot.
Yes.
It feels very much alive. I think the editing is fantastic. Debut film. The director said it's based on this novella by the German writer
Willem Jensen.
Yeah, exactly. And that just brought to mind that, I remember Gradiva because there's this study by Freud on the depiction of dreams in that novella. So I made the connection then later. In any case, do you want to quickly introduce us to the premise of the film? It's as simple as it gets, right? In terms of...
there's a French high school group that's visiting southern Italy. They're visiting specifically Pompeii as well. Maybe they go to Naples.
Yeah, they do.
And they're just visiting. They're at the age of sexual discovery and openings and, the idea that perhaps a volcanic eruption and an orgasm could be put together, which is not overtly done in the film, thank goodness, is there. And so all that bubbling interest and looking towards the others, looking at the others and watching and observing. The opening scene is essentially two people who notice, but in separate ways, two of their group getting it on with one another in a private train car. And then later we follow the one guy, the first person who sees, his name is Tony. Mm-hmm. And he has this whole fable of, what this trip means for him, or his grandparents had been, or the story that he knows is that his grandparents had fallen to their demise, the relationship and also life of the grandfather following a 1980s earthquake or eruption. And I think it was an earthquake, though, that was said to have destroyed the villa in which he lived and then forced the grandmother, who had this eternal love for the grandfather, to move to France. And so he brings this whole entire romantic fable with him to the trip, shares it with his friends, and then over the course of the film discovers that perhaps his ideas, his big romanticism just kind of collapses. And it's in ruins.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. Yeah, I think it's an incredibly observed film. The director has spent a considerable amount of time with the research here. She went to schools to interview, students of that age. She then even went on a class trip where she met at least the actor of Tony, who's more or less the protagonist here. There are two other characters who I think, or maybe three, because there's also the teacher. And I think the teacher here is the secret MVP. This is, of course, a film that could never play like this in the United States. You have a teacher here who spends some evenings with the students, smokes with them at the table, and just partakes in their discussions on society and on the education system, even though then she's primarily listening to them, but it's something, that parents in the United States would never accept.
She's very human, and she's just present
Right.
there on the trip. Even though she's guiding them, she's also as fallible to the temptation and enjoyment of anyone else.
Yeah, and of that moment. And she is also having perhaps one of the greatest scenes for me of the film. There's this scene where she stands in the front of the bus next to the bus driver. The bus driver and she, they are almost talking in different registers about something, you know, and this scene reveals how fragile she is as well, and how much she is longing for some connection as well. It's, I would say, even this opening scene in the train, maybe, I don't know, 15 minutes or so, I think this is stronger than many of the films I've seen here in Cannes this year. I think we have a similar beef with this film, which is more like the second half. We don't know really what...
We don't know how to deal with the runes, essentially.
The ruins of the story doesn't quite seem to know how to end, even though according to the director that is how it all started, and we can say, this is based on a novella, and the premise of a novella is basically an unheard of event, because it's usually the structure of a novella is you look back at something because something decisive for your life has happened. And in a way, this film does depict that as well and does go into that as well, that kind of territory. I will also say the city of Napoli, and it feels so alive here. Like little details when the camera just pans through the night and there's this tree and you see it being shaken by youngsters and a ball, a football falls down, from it. And it really feels like there's a lot of going on. At one night they are at this wedding and anniversary of people they don't know whatsoever. And it just, for this brief moment in time, there seem to be all these opportunities and possibilities. Like you can get in touch with all the people there, and it's like this utopian place. There's also these grinder dates, because we haven't mentioned that, but this is a very queer film. And what I found interesting is that queerness here almost seems like hegemonic here. Like the cool kids here are the queer kids, basically, and this is more or less accepted, and like in terms of status, within among their peers. So I found that was an interesting outlook as well.
Yeah, I think I have a different view on that, but I can't quite verbalize it. But I did read in the press kit that it was hard for them. I believe that the casting with Julia Sukodowski took about 2 years, and that it was quite hard to find someone to play the lead of Tony, the director writes, because she didn't find an actor who was willing to play gay. And I find that that's also incredible that that's still an issue, even though I did hear recently in a French roundtable that it's so difficult to find actors who are either willing to play gay or who feel comfortable doing so, or who are actually gay, who don't reveal still that they are potentially queer in any sense, because it's just still poison in this industry.
Yeah, and I think that is particularly remarkable because at a place like Cannes, right, you don't only have all these films that have queerness in them. Like this year, it's incredible.
This year so much is really incredible,
but also the audience members here, right? They all go for that. I mean, if you look at the Jane Schönbrunn here, a film I really didn't like at all, but she had her fan club here, basically. It was people are cheering that up. And I mean, that's a great development for our societies overall. It's just strange to me to hear that then, that it's so difficult apparently to find the talent.
I would need to dig into it more just in general, but it seems like, somehow there's still this bias that you can't play a leading man who might be believably in love with a leading woman if you personally identify as queer, and that it's harder for men. So that's still a shame. I haven't seen the Schönbrunn though. It comes out in America in August.
Yeah, and they have this little extra tour. I don't know if you read that. They tour through certain cities in the United States to have some special showcases. Yeah.
But back to La Gradiva. The film, I mean, La Gradiva refers to she who walks, essentially. And the way that the film wraps itself up, they have these, even though you said that they were as if the queer kids could be the bullies, I felt more that they were a bit more individual, but I understand what you mean. There's a character named Suzanne who is more artistic.
And the outsider.
And an outsider. She clearly has a lot of insecurity regarding herself and her looks, but she's able to have an outlet for that. She draws all the time. And then towards the end, of course, classically, all the students find out where they've been placed to go to university. And Suzanne is very happy with her placement. Fortunately, there's a tragedy that ensues, and Suzanne winds up also being the narrator in some sense that closes the whole entire film. This just tried to reframe everything as if it in itself, the whole entire film was a story. And I think that also is why it was difficult for me, because it felt like, what have we just watched? We just watched something that tried to show us teenagers enjoying themselves, show them blossoming and blooming, but then to have such a convergence of fates.
Yeah, I think that didn't work at all. I mean, maybe there are one or two listeners to listen to the Western episode of Valeska Grisebach.
Mm-hmm.
And then we also briefly discussed Longing, her previous film.
Yeah.
And that film did something similar, but it made much more sense thematically, because it also played with the notion of rumors, how stories come into the world and how they change and how malleable they are. Here you don't have that at all. It tries to be neat, but I think it plays out as rather superficial. So I think especially the last third, perhaps, of the film didn't quite work, but what I've seen so far is still one of the most impressive filmmaking of the entire festival. And this was a film in
Semaine de la Critique.
Yeah, so
yes.
one of the smaller sections here. Yes. In any case, I think that's
we
where we have to wrap up, because you're going to see Sandra Wollner's everything now. Yeah. And next time we may be able to talk about one or two other competition films. Mm-hmm. And so far, thank you, Eliana.
Thank you. Bye-bye.